Okay, I'm just going to say first off the top that we're digging into a bit of a tough subject. This episode is going to deal with issues of sexual abuse, so take care while you're listening to this. The use of non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, in the world of classical music, that's what we are talking about today. And the reason we're talking about it is because there was this reporting in the Globe and Mail about an allegation of sexual abuse inside the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra by one of its former members. Robyn Doolittle, the Globe reporter behind that story, is here with us. And then also back on the show, we have acclaimed violinist Lara St, who has spent decades bringing these issues to light. Thank you both for being here today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Listen, Robyn, I'll start with you. You published a story in late December. We're detailing this experience of Esther Huang, who's a violinist, who says that while she was a senior member at the VSO, she came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. And then in 2019, there's a settlement. And she says a part of that settlement is signing a non-disclosure agreement. Talk to me briefly about what she says happened next and why she chose to go public with her story.
Yeah, so she was an extra violinist, which is essentially like a contract worker. And she alleges that while she was working in this position regularly for the VSO, she was sexually assaulted by a senior member. When she reported it, there was, a bit of an investigation, and then there was a settlement. And part of that agreement was that she would relinquish her ability to ever speak about what happened in exchange for about $7,100, which mostly was earmarked for covering counseling fees, and a guarantee that the alleged perpetrator would leave. She signs this agreement, and then she says within weeks, the orchestra began retaliating against her, first offering her diminished roles, and then eventually cutting her hours to the point that by early 2020, and before the pandemic, I think it's worth noting that, before the pandemic, she was no longer working there. So what she was talking to the Globe about is kind of two things. One, in speaking out, she was violating this confidentiality agreement, which the public commonly refers to NDAs. And then secondly, she was just talking about this experience of what she says is professional retaliation for bringing this complaint to light. So it's kind of a two-pronged story.
Okay, I'm going to come back to her sort of talking about the NDAs in just a moment, but we should note here that the VSO has kind of maintained it had taken Huang's original complaint seriously, and then they say they ordered an external investigation which didn't find any evidence supporting that Huang claim of retaliation.
Of the retaliation, yeah.
Right.
The first investigation into the actual alleged assault and was never completed. It was dropped as part of the settlement.
So, Lara, I want to bring you here because you have your own experience inside of this industry, and you spent decades trying to change these things. So what is it like for you to hear about this treatment for Esther Huang and the stuff that she says took place after she filed that complaint?
Well, it's obviously very disappointing. These institutions, I mean, for me, I'm more about the institutions of learning rather than orchestras, but they basically, their reputation is all they care about. They don't care about the victim or the survivor. And so, like what happened to Esther and what happened to me, the woman is basically just kind of shunted to the curb so that they can keep their reputation and their and everything intact. And that's a big problem with the NDAs because, the victim is essentially silenced forever. And I mean, I have a hell of a lot of respect for Esther for coming out and doing it publicly, and especially at such a young age.
When you saw the reaction to Esther sort of coming out in this story, what did you make of the reaction that she got publicly?
Well, I think most of the reaction was very for Esther, from what I could tell. I mean, that's, Catherine Needleman and I started a petition. We got 15,000 signatures, and all of them were like, oh, my gosh, Vancouver Symphony, what are you doing? But then, you go look at the Globe and Mail comments, for example, and you've got like, the typical kind of like, well, it's probably her fault. It's just so much victim blaming out there. It's crazy, and that's what I'm trying to change, especially in my little profession. I can't do much about the entire world, but if I can change something there, then I'm willing to do it.
So, Robyn, let me just catch people up a little bit about what happened after that story comes out. So first, we got to talk about the open letter that the VSO put out last week. To quickly recap here, so like things kind of moved a little bit fast after the story came out. The organization first hit Esther Huang with a cease and desist letter. They threatened legal action for breaching that NDA. That ended up triggering a whole bunch of backlash against the VSO. So then that's when the VSO sort of softened its stance with this letter. They said they're not going to pursue legal action, and actually they're going to plan to end the use of NDAs in these cases involving sexual misconduct. So people are now caught up.
Yeah.
But you've been reporting on NDAs for a minute, and you sort of have seen the way that these fights kind of take place differently in Canada and in the United States. What do you make of this move by the VSO?
I think it's hugely significant. I know it's not as far as some people wanted it to go, but I haven't seen anything like this in Canada before. I've been deeply immersed in this type of reporting on sexual violence for more than a decade now. I've done lots of investigative series, and my focus has always been on institutions' response to allegations, whether it's workplaces or police services or the justice system. The NDA story has never really caught on in Canada in the way that it did in the United States.
You mean like the NDA as a tool?
Just, yeah, like that element of this of sexual violence has never been really dug into in Canada. I mean, in the U.S., the Me Too movement went viral because the New York Times, the New Yorker stories about Harvey Weinstein really underscored that this producer was able to continue abusing women. I don't know if we have to say allegedly anymore, probably not. Women in the industry for so many years because he was using NDAs to keep them silent. And then in response, a huge number of American states have passed legislation restricting these types of agreements. And in Canada, it's really just PEI. Ontario passed a law.
PEI has legislation.
PEI has laws restricting the use. So it doesn't mean it's an outright ban, but there's limitations on it. For example, they can't be used in certain types of cases because NDAs, by the way, are used uncontroversially in business all the time to protect trade secrets. It's when they're used in allegations of criminality, discrimination, these types of acts that really raise ethical questions around whether they should be used. So that's why this story was so significant to me, and that this type of thing really hasn't kind of blown up in Canada, I don't think. And that's, I think, partly why we haven't seen the sort of legislation that you've seen south of the border.
So just to contextualize what you're saying there, you're saying that like PEI has legislation to sort of restrict where NDAs can be applied. Ontario is sort of having this conversation as well.
Ontario's is about universities, but it's not across the province. And then it's come up in other places, but for various reasons hasn't actually progressed.
Right.
If I could take just one more second, the thing that was so significant to me about Esther's case is, one, what did she get here? We know because she's violated the end. She got $7,100, right? Like, and it's earmarked mostly to reimburse counseling expenses, and then a guarantee that this individual would leave the orchestra because she was so worried about professional retaliation, and that she wanted to keep working there. And she alleges that the VSO at the time pressured her into signing the NDA that if you want to keep working here, you're going to have to do this.
Right.
So that's one element of it. The VSO, doesn't, in response to questions about that, will say that she was represented by a seasoned lawyer during those negotiations. So then she says she loses her job almost immediately. And then a couple of years later, she's talking to someone in the community, and they say that they heard a rumor. Oh, I heard that you're not at the VSO anymore, and this individual isn't at the VSO anymore because you guys had an affair. And then so she's in that moment having to decide, do I violate this? Like, think of how upsetting that would be for her. So there were just so many elements of this story that I think really contributed to it resonating with people.
When we sort of talk about this idea of like, okay, PEI has legislation, Ontario is sort of having this conversation, British Columbia doesn't, right? So and so we get to this place where the VSO takes the next step that they normally do, which is that ceases and desist letter saying, hey, this might be a violation and breach of the NDA. And then they walk that back with that open letter. What's your reaction to all of this, Lara? This idea, like that feels like it is new territory that maybe we haven't seen before.
Oh, the cease and desist, that was unbelievable. It was like the day after the article, your first article came out, right? It says to survivors, if you speak, we will muzzle you once again. I mean, I was outraged. And I think a lot of other people were, and that's when we started the petition.
That's the backlash, yeah.
And I think that it was the 15,000 basically musicians signing this petition that made them do that open letter. I think they would have stayed in their little hole saying, "Oh, this didn't happen."
Well, they would have just said we have the right to
Exactly.
issue this cease and desist. That's the only thing they would have.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's only public pressure, and of course, Robyn's great reporting
Yeah.
that did any of this. Otherwise, nobody would know about this. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think it's so fantastic that she's really stayed on all these articles and everything, because it really, trial by media is the only way to do it, as I so well know.
Actually, first of all, I should tell radio folks that you're pointing vigorously at Robyn, be like, reporting by you, Robyn, which is and I love that.
Yes,
That's
I was
great.
pointing at her.
Yeah.
But when you sort of see that open letter, what's your reaction to that? Like, does that feel like it sort of addressed the points that the backlash should have brought up?
It just sounded like a whole bunch of lawyers in a room saying, how can we do this with giving the least amount possible? As Catherine Nealman said, they threw the smallest possible bone out. And it just like, they said, well, we don't intend to bring charges, and actually they can go volte-face on that one. They can go 180 and still do it. That doesn't mean they should have said, in my opinion, they should have said, we absolutely will never bring any kind of more, cease and desist against Esther. And also we will never have any kind of NDAs in the future. They said mostly we won't, so there's all these couching in that letter. And then also there's this NDA that was done so quickly and so kind of horribly. How many more are there in the past? I really wanted them to say, we're going to quash all the NDAs.
All the past NDAs.
All the past NDAs about sexual assault and sexual harassment. And they didn't.
I guess the larger dimension of this is we don't know what other NDAs there are, because that's the whole point of an NDA. But let me ask you this. The VSO does acknowledge in that letter that they connected with the Can't Buy My Silence campaign.
Yes, who are great.
You said that's a significant step, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Julie McFarlane also said,
Do you want to talk about what that campaign is, by the way? Yeah.
Can't Buy My Silence is basically trying to get rid of NDAs in Canada.
Yeah.
The sort of the same way the states has state by state been doing that. But Julie McFarlane also put out a statement saying, well, okay, great, Vancouver, but not good enough. Come on, you really should be quashing all of them. And, so I agree with her. I mean, yeah, it's a bone, but they had to throw that. Otherwise there's 15,000 of us going like, come on.
Robyn, you seem to be.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple things about the letter to really hit that were they did say that they were going to not force any sexual assault complainant to ever sign one again, but they leave the option open. But I think a lot of people kind of raised questions of why doesn't this extend to things like discrimination, for example.
Right.
And they did seem to leave a little bit of wiggle room over whether they would go after Esther. In a subsequent follow-up interview that I had with Angela, the CEO, she did clarify they will absolutely not pursue legal action against Esther. It related to the breach of confidentiality. And the cease and desist did note at libel. I think that there is one point I do want to raise around the legislation that's a little bit controversial in some areas, but a lot of some of the employment lawyers that I know that do this work are not in favor of an outright ban on NDAs.
They don't want to get rid of the tool.
They want to basically leave it up to the complainant. And the reason is, so for example, there are women on, I'll say that I've interviewed that are on Bay Street that have had situations in their workplaces, very small industry, high level. They want to move on to another job. Right. And for them, they just want to get enough money to transition somewhere else.
So the NDA is like a protective measure.
Well, and in those cases, it's leverage that they can use. Now,
Yeah.
Julie and Can't Buy My Silence will hate me mentioning this because it's controversial. People don't think that maybe like that's a bogus argument. But I can say that as someone who does this, a lot of this work and interviews a lot of people who work in this space, that is the counter argument. So it's tricky. But I think that there is a place for legislation. I think that we're seeing that for sure.
I guess like the thing that I'm trying to sort of like wrap my mind around is this like sort of larger idea of, I feel like there's a real absence of talking about the NDA as a tool. And then you get stories like this, and that's when you can sort of begin to open that door and say, okay, this is a specific case and a specific person, but also look at how this tool sort of functions in the space. Robyn, do you
Or
have,
doesn't.
or I was going to say, like, do you have a sense of just like the pervasiveness of NDAs, or is actually like, is the whole point that we don't don't know much about where they are.
I mean, that is the thing.
Yeah.
We have no idea.
Yeah.
But I can say in my 10 years of reporting on this, I've interviewed well over a dozen women who are bound by NDAs and who didn't want to sign one and were forced to sign one and, have been struggling with it ever since. I've spoken with women who have had legal action taken against them for breaking their NDA.
Right.
So this is, I mean, I think when you said tool, that's exactly what it is. It's a tool, and it's a tool that necessarily shouldn't be used to keep someone silent who doesn't want to be silent. I think that's the conversation that it's moving towards.
But even if somebody wants to be silent, what that does is it protects the perpetrator. And that's why I and people like Julie hate NDAs, because it allowed, for example, my rapist as a child to continue teaching for another 11 years till he died. Not that I signed an NDA, I was 14, but like, for example, Esther's person, I guess, alleged person,
Alleged
I have to
perpetrator,
say,
yeah.
okay, is out there still teaching young girls and young women, and I happen to know that people do not change their spots or their freckles or whatever it is for people. And that's the problem, is that if you don't name the perpetrators, if it's not made public in some way, then they just keep on doing it. So for me, an NDA is a problem because what it's doing is not protecting future women and girls and children.
That is 100% the balance that it's trying to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around where you begin to measure how things are changing, because at one time, like, you were maybe the sole voice talking about some of this stuff in your industry, Lara. I think like there wasn't a lot of conversation being raised about this, and then we kind of get to this place now where there are more people talking about it. This feels like maybe the start of a moment of kind of reckoning. As someone who has this view on the inside, does that feel true? Does that feel like things are changing, or actually like, no, we're too far from that?
It's just too slow. It's really slow. And this profession especially is just so mired in the, 18th and 19th centuries and the music of, dead white men, basically. And I think we've basically proven at this point that talent is gender equal when it comes to, it's not shot putting. It's playing a violin or a piano or singing or whatever. And there are still many parts of this profession which are, let's say, to be fair, or actually to be kind of nice about it, 90% men and 10% women, like conducting, like composition, like a lot of the brass instruments, bass. And that means that in those parts of my profession, there's like 40% of men who are actually quite mediocre and have a really vested interest in keeping women down. And so that's where it all kind of comes in. There's exclusion of women, harassment of women, abuse of women, and they're all tied together. And that's what we really have to go against. And, and the silencing of people like Esther is just one more, like, arrow in their quiver that to just keep women down in this profession.
I was going to say, Robyn, for you, like, you've covered these issues when it comes to across a bunch of different industries. I know this is kind of the first story that you've done sort of in the classical music realm, but like, what do you think it is about this industry that makes it particularly slow or takes a while to change?
Yeah, well, you've mentioned, Catherine Needleman, who is this influential oboist based in the U.S., and I was talking to her about this, and she mentioned that this is a sector, for lack of a better word, that reveres the work of men from hundreds of years ago. And when you talked about comments in the Globe, like, that was one of the things that I thought jumped out at, is because she said that in the story, and people got their knickers in a knot about that. And I think, like, I didn't read that as Catherine saying she doesn't appreciate Bach or Beethoven or Mozart at all. Like, she's dedicated her life to this. But it's about acknowledging the realities of what it means to be in that, to work in that space. And I think that is something that this is, that kind of godlike figures. And I thought that was really interesting, that sort of added a layer of this that I didn't appreciate. So that's kind of where I took it from. And again, just to people, it's interesting, like, when you look at these types of stories and people's reaction, and it kind of instantly retreat to their side of the culture wars. And I wish we could, like, I really wish we could move past that. Like, this is not, it doesn't have to be that. Someone can state the absolute fact that classical music reveres the music of of composers who by and large happen to be, white men from hundreds of
Objectively
years
true.
ago.
Yeah.
Like, that's just true.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. They've devoted their life to it. That is a fact. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that we should hate classical music. That's not the point. It's about understanding, okay, this is what's happening in this industry. These are the realities of working. How do we try to keep different groups safe now within that organization and in that space?
Lara, let me give you the last word on this. How do you begin to make this industry safer?
Well, by talking, by things like what Robyn did, by getting it out there in the public. Because these institutions themselves aren't going to do anything. We've already seen that. I've seen that for the past 40 years with the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. I'm about to premiere a documentary about sexual assault in music schools called Dear Lara. And I went all over the world and spoke to other survivors and even spoke to people who were in the heads of these conservatories and these orchestras. And it just has to become better known. I mean, I guess, sunlight is a great disinfectant. It's a little trite, but, so is
It's also
fire.
a slow disinfectant. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, let's burn it down, man, because it's so toxic, the underbelly of classical music. And everybody's like, oh, but it's so beautiful. You must have such a great time. Well, actually, you should see what happens behind the curtains, when the show's over. And yeah, I mean, just knowledge, publicity, media, all of that. Let's get it out there and let's get this thing cleaned up so that women and children are allowed to have a happy and healthy life in this profession.
I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. I appreciate your time, both of you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
I should say, Lara, you can't talk about it just yet, but you're about to let people know when your movie's coming out. I think that should maybe pay attention to your Instagram page. That's what we should
I'm
do,
announcing on Wednesday when the premiere will be, and dearlara.film, Dear Lara Doc, Instagram. I will be very, very loud from the rooftops, from the mountains about it.
We'll absolutely be looking out for that. Lara St. John is a Canadian violinist and documentary filmmaker. Robyn Doolittle is a reporter with the Globe and Mail. Dear Lara is premiering very soon, and we'll hear more information about that. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. See you tomorrow.